You know that image of medieval queens, elegant gowns flowing across marble floors, skin so pale it almost glows, jewels, perfume, perfect posture, paintings that make them look almost untouchable, like they lived in a world of beauty, luxury, and absolute cleanliness. But that image, it's a lie, because the truth is, a medieval queen, at the height of power, wealth, and beauty, was often more disgusting than the poorest peasant living outside the castle walls. And I don't mean slightly unclean, I mean rotting teeth hidden behind forced smiles, skin layered with toxic substances, hair crawling with parasites, the kind of reality that no artist would ever dare to paint. Because if they did, no one would admire these queens. They'd be horrified by them. See, we've been taught to associate royalty with perfection, cleanliness, superiority. But in the medieval world, those things didn't always go together. In fact, sometimes they were complete opposites. The same queen who wore silk gowns worth a fortune might be wearing undergarments that hadn't been properly cleaned in weeks. The same woman who sat on a golden throne could be surrounded by smells so overwhelming they had to be masked with heavy perfume. And the same face that appeared flawless in portraits could be hiding decay just beneath the surface. Because back then, beauty wasn't about being clean, it was about looking clean. And those are two very different things. What made this even more disturbing is that this wasn't ignorance. It wasn't because they didn't have access to water, or didn't have servants, or didn't have the resources to live differently. They had all of that. They had entire staffs dedicated to their comfort. They had access to some of the finest materials and luxuries in the world. They could have been the cleanest people alive, but many of them chose not to be, because of beliefs, because of trends, because of ideas about health and beauty that today seem completely unthinkable. And once you start to peel back that layer of illusion, you begin to realize something unsettling. The more powerful and fashionable a queen was, the more extreme, and sometimes more disturbing, her daily routines became. What you're about to hear isn't just strange, it's uncomfortable. It's the kind of reality that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the past. Because what was happening behind palace doors, under those heavy gowns, and beneath those carefully painted faces, was far more shocking than anyone ever talks about. And it all starts with something simple. What happened the moment a queen woke up in the morning? When you think of a powerful medieval queen, one name probably comes to mind: Elizabeth I. She's remembered as one of the most iconic women in history. Strong, intelligent, untouchable, and above all, beautiful. At least that's what the portraits show. Smooth, pale skin, perfect symmetry, absolute control over her image. But those portraits weren't reality. They were carefully constructed illusions. Because that flawless white skin? It didn't come from nature. It came from layers of thick white makeup made from lead, a toxic substance that slowly poisoned the body over time. At first, it created the desired effect, smooth, porcelain-like perfection. But underneath, the damage was already beginning. The skin would dry out, crack, and eventually begin to decay. So what did they do? They applied more, layer after layer, covering the damage with the very thing that caused it. And it wasn't just the skin. Elizabeth was known for her love of sugar, something incredibly rare and expensive at the time, a symbol of wealth, a luxury only the elite could afford. But that luxury came with a cost. Her teeth began to rot. They darkened, then blackened, and eventually many of them were gone entirely. And yet, instead of seeing this as a problem, the court saw it as status. Because if the queen had black teeth, it meant she could afford sugar. So other noblewomen began doing something almost unthinkable. They started imitating it. Some would darken their teeth intentionally, others used mixtures that actually made the decay worse. All to match the appearance of the most powerful woman in the room. Think about that for a second. Decay became fashion, damage became beauty. And this wasn't an isolated case. Across royal courts, appearance became a performance, a carefully maintained illusion designed to signal wealth, power, and control, no matter what was happening underneath. Because in that world, it didn't matter how you actually lived, it mattered how you looked while living it. And the more convincing the illusion, the less anyone questioned what it was hiding. Which raises a disturbing question. If this is what they were willing to do just to maintain the image, what was happening behind the scenes, where no one was supposed to look? Now let's move past the illusion and look at the part no one ever painted. What was actually happening under those gowns? Because this is where everything changes. Despite the wealth, the servants, the access to water, many medieval queens didn't bathe regularly. Not because they couldn't, but because they believed they shouldn't. At the time, there was a widespread idea that bathing too often could weaken the body, even allow disease to enter through the skin. So instead of washing, they layered. Undergarment over undergarment, fabric over fabric, perfume over everything. The belief was that clothing absorbed dirt and oils. So as long as you changed layers occasionally, you were clean. But in reality, those layers became traps. Sweat, body oils, and bacteria built up over time. Undergarments were often worn for days, sometimes weeks, before being properly cleaned. And even then, cleaning didn't always mean what you think it does. Water wasn't always used the way we'd expect. In some cases, fabrics were rinsed in solutions like stale urine, valued at the time for its ammonia content. Now imagine wearing that repeatedly against your skin. And inside those layers, life was thriving. Body lice lived in the seams of clothing, coming out to feed on blood. Fleas moved freely between fabric, skin, and bedding. Bites caused constant itching, irritation, and sometimes open sores. In fact, dealing with parasites wasn't occasional. It was part of the daily routine. Each morning, queens would sit while servants carefully went through their hair and clothing, picking out lice, crushing them, removing eggs. This process could take hours, and even then, it didn't solve the problem, because the environment itself was infested. Beds, floors, curtains, clothing. Everything became part of the cycle. And the longer things went unwashed, the worse it became. Skin would react. Rashes would form. Infections could develop in even the smallest wounds. But instead of addressing the cause, they managed the symptoms. More perfume, more powders, more layers, all designed to mask what was really happening. Because again, cleanliness wasn't about removing the problem, it was about hiding it. And as long as the illusion held, no one asked questions. But the longer this continued, the more the body began to break down, and what started as discomfort slowly turned into something much more serious. And this is where everything takes a darker turn, because up until now you could almost explain it. Different beliefs, different standards, a lack of understanding. But what came next wasn't just misguided, it was dangerous. In the pursuit of beauty, medieval queens and noblewomen began using methods that didn't just hide problems, they actively made them worse. Take their hair, for example. By the 16th and 17th centuries, many women had stopped relying on their natural hair entirely. Instead, they wore elaborate wigs, At first glance, that might sound like an improvement, but it wasn't. These wigs were often made from real human hair, sometimes taken from the poor, sometimes even from the dead. They were styled using mixtures of animal fat, oils, and powders to hold their shape. Now imagine that combination sitting on your head, day after day, week after week, without being properly cleaned. It didn't take long before those wigs became breeding grounds. Lice nested deep inside them, fleas multiplied, and in some cases, even maggots began to appear, feeding on the decaying organic material. There are accounts of insects literally falling out of wigs during social gatherings. And underneath those wigs, the scalp wasn't any better. Many women shaved their heads to make the wigs fit more securely. But constant irritation, combined with poor hygiene, led to sores, infections, and raw, damaged skin. And still, the wigs stayed on, because appearance mattered more than comfort, more than health, more than reality, and it didn't stop at hair. To achieve the perfect look, women used cosmetics that were quietly destroying them. White lead was applied to the face to create that pale, flawless complexion, but over time it caused serious damage. Skin deterioration, hair loss, and eventually symptoms of poisoning. Yet instead of stopping, they doubled down, adding more makeup to cover the effects of the previous layer. It became a cycle. Damage, then concealment, then more damage. Some even used substances like belladonna in their eyes to create a wide, glassy appearance, a look considered beautiful at the time. But the side effects included blurred vision, hallucinations, even permanent blindness. And through all of this, they knew something was wrong. They could feel it. The irritation, the pain, the slow breakdown of their own bodies. But in a world where beauty defined status, stopping wasn't an option, because once the illusion started to crack, everything else could fall apart with it. And by this point, the cost of maintaining that illusion was becoming impossible to ignore. So what was life really like for a medieval queen? Not the painted version, not the polished, romanticized version we've been shown, the real version. It was waking up in a bed that hadn't been properly cleaned, sometimes for weeks. Sheets carrying the weight of everything, sweat, oils, parasites, layered over time. It was putting on garments that looked magnificent on the outside, but underneath were stiff, worn, and saturated with use. It was sitting in grand halls filled with perfume, not to enhance the air, but to hide what was actually there, because behind the scent of flowers and incense was something much harder to ignore: unwashed bodies, stagnant air, and an environment that was never truly clean. Queens like Isabella of Castile even believed that avoiding bathing was a sign of discipline, even devotion. That discomfort brought them closer to something higher. So instead of seeking relief, they embraced the suffering, and over time, that mindset spread. Because if the most powerful women in society lived this way, then it must have meant something. But the consequences were real. Skin conditions that never healed, infections that spread quietly, bodies slowly weakened by constant exposure and toxic practices, and in many cases, early deaths that no one fully understood at the time. This wasn't luxury. It was an illusion built on top of neglect. A world where appearance mattered more than reality. Where looking powerful was more important than actually being well. And that illusion was so strong that it fooled not just the people living in that time, but us, centuries later. Because when we look back at these queens, we don't see the discomfort, we don't see the damage. We see control, beauty, perfection, But now you know the truth, that behind every flawless portrait was a reality that was far more human and far more disturbing. The crown didn't protect them. It didn't elevate them above the conditions of their world. If anything, it trapped them inside expectations they couldn't escape. And the next time you see one of those paintings, take a second look, because what it hides is far more revealing than what it shows.